Your mind is a battlefield. Every day, thoughts flood your mind. Some uplifting, some discouraging, some filled with faith, and others filled with doubt. The question is, how do you know which ones are from God? How do you discern His voice in the middle of all the noise? The truth is, not every thought that enters your mind is from God. Some are whispers of doubt, designed to pull you away from your purpose. Others are fears that try to keep you from stepping into your destiny. And then there are the thoughts planted by God, thoughts that build you up, strengthen you, and push you toward the life He has planned for you. But if we are not careful, we can allow the wrong thoughts to take root, and before we know it, they shape the way we see ourselves, the way we see our future, and even the way we see God. The mind is a battlefield, a place where the forces of divine truth and human thoughts collide. Every day, without fail, countless thoughts flood our minds. Some filled with faith and promise, others wrapped in fear and doubt. Some thoughts encourage us to step into God's plan, while others try to pull us away from it. The battle is not fought in the physical realm, it is waged in the quiet corridors of the mind, where decisions are made, perspectives are shaped, and destinies are determined. From the very beginning, humanity has struggled with this tension between divine truth and human reasoning. When God speaks, His words are full of power, peace, and purpose. But almost immediately, opposing thoughts begin to whisper, "Are you sure? What if you fail? What if it doesn't work out?" These are the voices that challenge faith, the voices that make obedience seem risky, the voices that try to drown out the certainty of God's promises with the uncertainty of human logic. Many people go through life without realizing that not every thought deserves their attention. Just because something enters the mind does not mean it should take up residence there. Thoughts of fear, insecurity, and negativity often disguise themselves as wisdom, convincing us that we are simply being cautious or realistic. But divine truth does not operate on human logic. When God calls someone to step forward in faith, He does not provide all the details. He does not lay out the entire journey before the first step is taken. He simply speaks, and He asks for trust. The battle begins the moment we decide whether to believe Him or to believe the voice of doubt. Throughout history, the greatest victories were won by those who chose divine truth over human reasoning. Noah built an ark when there was no sign of rain. Abraham believed in a promise that seemed impossible. Moses stretched out his hand over the Red Sea when logic said there was no way forward. These moments were not fueled by human wisdom. They were the result of people trusting God's voice over their own understanding. Yet, the enemy knows that if he can influence the mind, he can influence the future. He does not need to take away a person's faith entirely. He only needs to introduce enough doubt to make them hesitate. A delayed obedience is often as dangerous as disobedience itself. When God speaks and a person waits too long to respond, they give room for human reasoning to step in, for fear to take hold, for all the what-ifs to multiply. Before long, what started as faith turns into overthinking, and the moment to step into destiny begins to slip away. God's truth is unwavering. His promises do not change based on circumstances, but human thoughts are unstable, shifting with emotions, fears, and external pressures. One day a person may feel full of faith, ready to conquer anything. The next day they may feel uncertain, questioning everything they once believed. If emotions determine faith, then faith will always be unstable. But when a person anchors themselves in divine truth, when they choose to believe what God says regardless of how they feel, then their foundation becomes unshakable. Winning the battle of the mind is not about ignoring human thoughts. It is about filtering them through the lens of God's truth. It is about recognizing which thoughts align with His promises and which ones seek to undermine them. It is about refusing to entertain ideas that contradict His word. The mind will always have questions, but faith does not require every answer. Faith simply requires a decision to trust. One of the greatest strategies for victory in this battle is speaking truth aloud. Thoughts can be deceptive, but spoken words carry power. When fear whispers, speaking God's promises out loud silences the lies. When doubt creeps in, declaring His faithfulness pushes it back. There is something about hearing truth that reinforces it within the heart. The more a person speaks life, the more their mind begins to align with life. The more they declare victory, the less room there is for defeat. Every day a choice must be made. Will divine truth take precedence, or will human reasoning dictate the path forward? Will faith silence the doubts, or will doubts silence faith? The battle is not won in a single moment. It is won through consistent decisions. Decisions to believe, to trust, to move forward even when it does not make sense. Because in the end, God's truth will always stand, and those who choose to build their lives upon it will never be shaken. Life is filled with noise. From the moment we wake up, distractions compete for our attention. Responsibilities, worries, pressures, and the never-ending demands of the world. The mind becomes a battlefield of thoughts, racing in different directions, trying to solve problems, anticipate the future, and make sense of the present. In the middle of this whirlwind, it can feel difficult, if not impossible, to hear God's voice. Many people cry out for answers, for direction, for reassurance, yet they remain surrounded by confusion. They ask, "Why isn't God speaking? Why can't I hear Him?" But the truth is, God is not absent. He is not silent. He is speaking, but His voice is found in stillness, not in chaos. From the beginning, God has chosen to reveal Himself in quiet places. When Elijah stood on the mountain expecting God to manifest in a mighty wind, in an earthquake, or in fire, he found something surprising. God was not in the powerful forces of nature. Instead, He came in a gentle whisper. The message was clear. God does not need to shout over the noise. He waits for those who are willing to slow down, to quiet their hearts, to create space for His presence. The world operates at a frantic pace, always demanding more, always pushing harder, always filling every moment with activity. Society praises busyness as a sign of importance, but God values stillness as a sign of trust. When a person chooses to step away from the noise, they are making a declaration. I do not need to strive. I choose to rest in God's presence. I do not need to have all the answers. I trust that He does. That choice creates an atmosphere where His voice can be heard with clarity. Stillness is not just about physical quiet. It is about the condition of the heart. A person can be in a silent room yet still be filled with internal noise, worry, fear, stress, overthinking. God's voice does not compete with those things. He speaks in peace, and peace is only found when the heart is surrendered. Many times people ask for God's direction, but they are unwilling to let go of their own need for control. They want Him to speak, yet their hearts are too restless to receive what He is saying. Stillness is an act of surrender, a willingness to lay everything down and trust that He will guide in the right time, in the right way. They want him to speak, yet their hearts are too restless to receive. What he promises that he will give, they will take. Some of the greatest revelations come in moments of quiet. The answers people seek are often waiting on the other side of rest. When the mind slows down, when the heart is no longer striving, when there is space to listen, that is when God's voice becomes unmistakable. He is not distant, he is near. He is not silent, he is speaking. But his words are not found in the rush of the world. They are discovered in the sacred pause, in the moments of intentional stillness, in the quiet where his presence becomes undeniable. Many times, people assume that God will make his will known in loud, unmistakable ways. They expect grand signs, supernatural manifestations, or dramatic moments of clarity. But often, his leading is gentle. He does not force his way in. He invites, he nudges, he whispers, he places subtle confirmations in the heart. And when a person is too caught up in the rush of life, they can miss it. That is why stillness is not just beneficial, it is necessary. It is the key to hearing, to receiving, to understanding his direction. The enemy knows this. He knows that as long as people are distracted, as long as their minds are consumed with endless thoughts, they will struggle to hear the voice of God. That is why he fills life with noise, worries, fears, doubts, unnecessary distractions. If he can keep someone too busy to pray, too stressed to rest, too consumed to be still, he can keep them from the clarity and wisdom that God freely gives. But the moment a person chooses stillness, they step into a place of divine connection. God's voice brings peace. It does not rush, it does not pressure, it does not confuse. It brings a deep assurance that transcends human understanding. Even in the midst of uncertainty, his voice creates a stillness that anchors the soul. That is why those who learn to cultivate stillness carry a presence of peace wherever they go. They are not easily shaken because they have trained their hearts to recognize the gentle, unwavering voice of their Creator. In a world that constantly demands more, stillness is an act of faith. It is a declaration that God is in control, that his voice is worth waiting for, and that his presence is the most valuable thing in life. Those who are willing to slow down, to quiet the chaos, to listen beyond the noise, they will hear him, and when they do, they will realize he was never far away. He was speaking all along. All it took was stillness to finally hear. The mind is the gateway to perception, the lens through which life is interpreted, and the battleground where faith and doubt wrestle for control. Every thought that enters the mind has the potential to shape actions, influence decisions, and determine the direction of a person's life. If the mind is clouded by worry, fear, and distraction, clarity becomes elusive. But when the mind is renewed, when it is transformed by divine truth, the ability to hear God's voice with precision and certainty becomes second nature. So many people desire to hear from God, yet their thoughts are filled with noise, endless concerns, insecurities, anxieties, and the pressures of daily life. They wonder why clarity seems so distant, why direction feels so uncertain, and why confusion often takes the place of peace. But God does not speak in the language of chaos. His voice is not hidden, but it can be difficult to recognize when the mind is filled with distractions that drown out his presence. The process of renewing the mind is not just about removing negative thoughts. It is about replacing them with the thoughts of God, thoughts that align with his truth and reflect his promises. A mind that is constantly filled with doubt struggles to perceive divine direction. Doubt acts like static interference, distorting the clarity of God's voice. It causes a person to question whether they truly heard him, whether they are making the right decision, whether they are worthy of his guidance. But faith is the antidote to doubt. Faith does not demand all the answers before stepping forward. It trusts that God's direction will be revealed at the right time. When the mind is renewed with faith, it is no longer controlled by uncertainty. Instead, it is anchored in the unshakable truth that God is always speaking and always leading his people toward what is best. One of the greatest barriers to hearing God clearly is the weight of past experiences. Many people carry thoughts shaped by disappointment, failure, and rejection. These thoughts whisper, "What if it happens again? What if God doesn't come through? What if I'm not good enough?" When the mind is filled with these echoes of the past, it becomes difficult to move forward with confidence. But renewing the mind means choosing to see the present and the future through God's promises, rather than through the lens of past pain. It means declaring that yesterday's struggles do not define tomorrow's victories. It means embracing the truth that God's voice speaks of new beginnings, not old defeats. Renewing the mind also requires intentional focus. The world is filled with voices, opinions, influences, and countless sources of information that compete for attention. If a person constantly fills their mind with the noise of the world, it is no surprise that God's voice feels distant. What the mind feeds on will determine what it produces. When it is filled with negativity, it produces fear. When it is filled with distractions, it produces confusion. But when it is filled with God's word, it produces clarity, strength, and discernment. Renewing the mind is an ongoing process, a daily commitment to filter out what is unnecessary and focus on what is eternal. God desires to speak, to lead, to provide wisdom and direction, but he will not force his way into a cluttered mind. He waits for the one who is willing to quiet the noise, to surrender distractions, and to tune their heart to his voice. The more a person aligns their thoughts with God's truth, the more naturally they will hear him. His guidance will no longer feel distant or mysterious. It will become a constant, steady presence, leading with peace, confirming with assurance, and guiding with clarity. Renewing the mind is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle. It is the daily choice to reject fear and embrace faith. It is the commitment to silence doubt and amplify truth. It is the discipline to seek God's voice above every other influence. And when the mind is truly renewed, the struggle to hear him fades away, because his voice becomes unmistakable. It becomes the foundation upon which every decision is made, the anchor that holds through every storm, and the guiding light that leads into the fullness of his purpose. Life is full of distractions. Some come disguised as opportunities, some as urgent responsibilities, and others as seemingly harmless indulgences. But not every distraction is just a product of circumstance. Many are strategically placed obstacles designed to pull people away from their divine purpose. The enemy does not always show up as an obvious adversary. He works subtly, weaving distractions into daily life, not necessarily to destroy, but to delay, to drain energy, and to keep people so occupied with lesser things that they lose sight of what truly matters. Recognizing these distractions is essential for anyone who desires to stay aligned with God's plan. One of the most effective distractions the enemy uses is busyness. Society has glorified busyness as a sign of success, as if the more packed a schedule is, the more valuable a person becomes. But busyness does not always equal productivity, and it certainly does not equal spiritual growth. The enemy knows that if he can keep a person running from one thing to the next, filling every moment with responsibilities, tasks, and obligations, they will have no time left to sit in God's presence, to seek His voice, or to rest in His peace. A heart that is constantly rushing is a heart that struggles to hear. When a person is too busy to pray, too distracted to meditate on God's word, and too exhausted to seek Him, they have already fallen into one of the enemy's greatest traps. Another common distraction is negativity. The mind is a battlefield, and the enemy seeks to plant seeds of doubt, fear, and discouragement. He knows that a person's thoughts shape their reality. If he can keep someone focused on their failures, their insecurities, or their anxieties, he can slowly chip away at their faith. Instead of seeing God's promises, they only see problems. Instead of believing in their calling, they question whether they are good enough. The enemy understands that a distracted mind is a defeated mind. He does not always need to attack with force. Sometimes all he has to do is keep someone so consumed with worry that they forget who they are in Christ. Distractions also come in the form of unhealthy relationships. Not everyone who enters a person's life is meant to stay. Some people are placed there as detours, drawing attention away from God's plan. The enemy often sends people who drain energy, who encourage compromise, or who stir up unnecessary drama and conflict. It is easy to assume that every relationship is meant for good, but discernment is necessary. There are friendships that bring peace and others that bring chaos. There are voices that uplift and others that confuse. The wrong relationships can keep someone stuck in a cycle of emotional exhaustion, preventing them from moving forward into God's best. Another dangerous distraction is the pursuit of things that do not satisfy. The world offers endless entertainment, material possessions, and temporary pleasures that promise fulfillment but never truly satisfy the soul. The enemy wants people to chase after things that only leave them empty. He knows that if he can keep someone fixated on worldly success, on approval from others, or on short-lived excitement, they will never fully step into the lasting joy that comes from God alone. People often spend years chasing things that were never meant to fulfill them, only to realize that the distraction has stolen their time, their focus, and their passion for the things of God. Perhaps the most deceptive distraction is comfort. The enemy does not always fight people with hardships. Sometimes he lulls them into complacency. He convinces them that they have done enough, that they do not need to grow further, that they do not need to step out in faith. Comfort can become a prison when it keeps someone from moving forward. It whispers that change is too risky, that pursuing more of God is unnecessary, that staying where things are safe is the better option. But God's purpose always calls people beyond their comfort zones. If the enemy can keep someone satisfied with just enough, they will never experience the fullness of what God has prepared for them. Recognizing the enemy's distractions is the first step to overcoming them. It requires awareness, discernment, and a willingness to shift focus back to what truly matters. The enemy's greatest weapon is deception, making distractions seem harmless or even good. But when a person learns to recognize them, they take back their authority. They reclaim their time, their peace, and their focus. They begin to walk with clarity, no longer tossed around by every distraction, but firmly planted in God's purpose. Every day presents a choice, either to be led by distractions or to be led by purpose. The enemy will always try to pull attention away, but he does not have the final say. Those who remain vigilant, who keep their eyes fixed on God, and who refuse to be swayed by the noise of the world, will walk in the fullness of what has been prepared for them. Nothing the enemy sends can stop a person who has learned to recognize distractions and stay anchored in God's truth. Faith and feelings often stand in direct opposition to each other. Feelings shift like the wind, one moment full of confidence and excitement, the next weighed down by doubt and fear. Faith, on the other hand, is unwavering, not dependent on circumstances, emotions, or external validation. Faith stands firm even when feelings scream otherwise. Choosing faith over feelings is not about denying emotions, but about refusing to let them dictate direction, decisions, and destiny. Life is filled with moments when emotions threaten to take control. Fear whispers that the risk is too great. Anxiety magnifies problems until they seem insurmountable. Discouragement drains strength, making forward movement feel impossible. In those moments, faith is the only anchor strong enough to hold steady. Faith says that even when circumstances are uncertain, God is still in control. Faith declares that no matter how overwhelming the storm appears, there is always a way through. It is easy to trust when everything feels right. But true faith is proven in the moments when emotions are in turmoil, and trust is the only option left. There will always be days when feelings make giving up seem easier than pressing forward. Days when exhaustion takes over, when progress seems invisible, when prayers feel unheard. Feelings will argue that if things were truly meant to be, they wouldn't be this hard. But faith does not require instant results. Faith keeps going, even when there is no evidence that the breakthrough is near. It holds on to the unseen promise, trusting that the process is not in vain. Feelings fluctuate with circumstances, but faith remains constant, anchored in a truth that does not change. The enemy knows the power of emotions and will use them to create confusion. He will stir up doubt in moments of waiting. He will magnify insecurities, making faith seem foolish. He will use frustration to convince people that trusting God isn't worth it. But faith is a choice, not a feeling. It is the decision to believe that what God has spoken is greater than what the situation looks like. It is choosing to stand firm when everything else is shaking. Faith does not ignore reality. It simply refuses to be controlled by it. Many people allow their feelings to determine their actions. If they feel inspired, they move forward. If they feel discouraged, they hesitate. If they feel unworthy, they shrink back. But faith does not wait for perfect emotions. Faith steps out even when fear is present. Faith moves forward even when doubt lingers. Faith understands that feelings may not always agree, but obedience to God is never based on emotions. If faith was dependent on feelings, no one would ever take the first step into the unknown. God never promised that faith would always feel good. In fact, faith often requires stepping beyond comfort, beyond security, beyond what is easy to understand. It requires trust, even when the outcome is unclear. It means choosing to believe when there is no visible proof. Feelings crave control, certainty, and reassurance, but faith thrives in surrender. It does not need to see the whole picture to believe that God is working. It does not demand immediate results to remain confident in the promise. When feelings are given too much power, they create instability. One day full of courage, the next full of hesitation. One moment ready to move forward, the next second guessing every decision. Faith brings stability. It creates an unshakable foundation that emotions cannot erode. It says that even when everything feels uncertain, God is still leading the way. Faith trusts in the unseen. in the process, in the purpose that is unfolding even when it is not fully understood. Choosing faith over feelings is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Feelings will come and go, but faith leaves a lasting impact. Faith builds resilience. Faith strengthens character. Faith produces endurance. It transforms fear into boldness, doubt into trust, and uncertainty into unwavering confidence. The decision to live by faith is the decision to rise above fleeting emotions and stand firmly on the truth that never changes. Feelings may be powerful, but faith is stronger. And when faith is chosen over feelings, the impossible becomes possible. The unseen becomes reality, and the journey leads exactly where it was meant to go.